So great to have you, Justin, here
Thanks.
tonight. It's great to have these gatherings and explore these kind of topics, because it doesn't happen a lot, Even that there's a lot going on in the world, and spiritually we're definitely evolving. There's no doubt about it. But these kind of talks are really important, and to bring like-minded people together, So I just wanted to ask you. I mean, we'll set the stage for people. I mean, what made you go down this path? How did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to give you some context, my world and meditation could not have been further away from each other. Back in 2014, my background was in financial markets. I'd gone to work and live in London when I was 19, and I was an entrepreneur, and I built businesses. I understood systems. I knew how to deconstruct things and how to influence them. But an awareness of self or spirit, or even an awareness that I had a body, was not really part of what was going on in my mind. But back in 2011, we had a tragedy, and I was actually talking about this at the weekend on a podcast, and I was saying that when I say this, I preface everything by saying you don't need to have a tragedy to become healthier. So it's important to note that. But I was so disconnected from myself, it took an eventual tragedy to get me to pay attention. But our second child, Joshua, was born prematurely when we were on holiday in Spain, and my wife Beatrice is here. And we were expected to be there for a week. We ended up living in Spain for a year. We had our worlds turned upside down, and we were supposedly going back to London. But what happened was an emotional roller coaster over a year, where we had a baby that was born at 26 weeks, prematurely, with lots of challenges. But as parents, your only focus is on the survival of your child. We had another child with us at the time who was 3 at the time, our son Luca. And we spent 6 months in neonatal intensive care, and then we trained as Joshua's carers so that we could get him from the hospital into our home, which had to be within a couple of kilometers of the hospital. And we'd gone on this extraordinary path where we started to see some developments, and we started to see him recover and improve. And we decided that we'd come to Ireland with Joshua because we knew he was going to need a lot of attention. And I'm Irish originally, and Beatrice is German. But we never got there. We were planning, we'd organized an air ambulance to get us to Ireland, which, by the way, we had travel insurance, and I can't recommend it enough because that saved our bacon. And just as we'd organized everything, and we'd been in communication with Jack and Jill and Crumlin Hospital, Joshua took a turn for the worse again, and we were back in hospital, and it was the 4th time that they put him on life support in a year of his life. And the medical team said, look, that's it. And it was difficult because you're in the fight for your life, and you believe that you have to do everything that you can do, but all of a sudden somebody stops you. And amazingly, we can look at that now with a sense of wonder and achievement, because we found out subsequently, if you had been in England, they probably would have never gone twice with life support. But Spain is a different culture, not diminishing what happens in the UK for one moment. But I think the spiritual sense of the survival of children was more embedded in their society. So I think Joshua probably got to live longer than he should have. And so much of my journey has been, A, to honor Joshua. I get to speak about him and mention his name, and I get to work in this area. And I'd love to say that it was immediately after that moment that I had a phenomenal spiritual awakening and came to terms with all of my shit. But but I didn't. I did the exact opposite. So we brought Joshua to Ireland. We had his funeral here. But within a few weeks of his funeral, I was building another business. I was traveling the world, and burying myself inside my work as my therapy. And that kind of worked for a while until it really didn't. And then I started to unwind. And over the next 2 or 3 years, I developed, I think, in total about 7 autoimmune diseases. I was anxious, stressed, burnt out, leaning heavily on alcohol, still surviving at home in a family context. But I was traveling all the time. I was always away. My business interests weren't in Ireland. And eventually I had a panic attack. I had a panic attack in a board meeting with clients in an office, and in an environment where my business partners, my board members were not the kind of people that you could say, I don't really feel too well right now. Would anybody mind if I step out? So I knew whatever was going on, I had to keep going. And I thought maybe it was a heart attack, maybe it was a stroke. My left arm went numb. I always remember that it kept falling off the table. So I eventually held my left arm around my coffee cup and then held it by coupling it with my right so that it stopped falling off the table. And for context, if you ever want to know how much people pay attention to you, nobody in that room, and many of them I still know and I'm good friends with today, noticed there was anything going on with me, but I was literally falling apart. And that went on for about 20 minutes. And I left there and I thought, I need to go to the hospital. So I hopped into a cab and I said, get me to the hospital. 5 minutes away from the office, I felt fine. And I said to him, actually, no, change that. Go to my hotel. So I went to my hotel. I had a drink. I went home and I said to Beatrice, strange thing happened to me in the office the other day. Recounted the story. She started crying and said to me, you've stopped petting the dogs. You come home, you don't interact with our dogs anymore. You just have enough energy to be here with us, but you're just fading. And that was like when it really hit me. And I thought, something has to give. And I wanted to get well. And we were talking about this earlier, but I came from, and I'm sure anybody who's struggling with mental health issues here, this will resonate. I always find that people who have challenges often grew up in challenges. And I grew up in a home where my father was very ill, heavily medicated throughout his life, had electric shock treatment, spent many years where he just didn't talk to me, interact with me. And that's a path I didn't want to go down. So I wanted to go a non-medicated route. I wanted to understand what happened in that room and why did it happen. And that started a journey that got me here and eventually got me out of financial services and into this world.
It really, an experience like that, yeah. Do we need, I asked you this the other day as well, do we need suffering, in a sense, to bring us to these places,
Yeah, I think, I love the Buddhist psychology of, pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. Unfortunately, you have to endure a reasonable amount of suffering to decide if there's any possibility to separate yourself away from pain and suffering. I remember one of the practices that I worked on about 8 years ago was to try and spend days without negatively speaking to yourself. I remember stubbing my toe on the stairs and just noticing how interesting that experience is. Because you stub your toe on the stairs and you're like, oh, you fucking idiot. Right? Like if you're walking up the stairs and there's somebody walking beside you and they stub their toe, you wouldn't turn around and go, you fucking idiot. But we speak to ourselves in the most abhorrent fashions. And that's when I started to notice that there is that critic, that voice, that internal dialogue. And I knew I needed to get close to that. Like, who is that voice? Like, who is speaking? You know, and even now, as you're all sitting here listening, there's a voice. Most of you saying other things. This guy's crazy. What's he talking about? I will listen to him. And in studies, we can see that 90% of people, when questioned, recognize that they have internal dialogue and there is an inner critic. And then the 10% who say they don't have one are asked, who told you you don't have one? And they kind of go, well, my voice in my head. So I thought, I need to understand that too. So the one thing I did, which I do with all my clients, is I named it. And for me, the name that came to mind was to call that voice Lieutenant Dan from Forrest Gump. Because it's angry, it was deranged, it wanted me to be in a world of alcohol, and it's desperately unpleasant. But as I got closer to it and found the capacity to be with it, we got to understand each other a bit better. And if anybody's seen Forrest Gump, I'm sure many of you have, you know, even in the end of the movie, Lieutenant Dan, who's now getting married and is a nicer, happier chap, still kind of sneers a bit at Forrest. And my Lieutenant Dan still would have sneered at me a bit coming in here today, going, yeah, nobody wants to hear you. But we have to understand that if we can find peace within ourselves, then we can truly find peace outside of ourselves. Because the pain is coming from out here and it's going to be internalized. So if you can find peace within yourself, then there's an opportunity when you stub your toe to just notice the stubbing of the toe.
When you had that experience and you started to delve into this work, the grief probably that you'd been running away from about your son, did you then go right? Did you say to yourself, I'm willing to take this on now, I'm willing to feel this?
Well, I knew that it was quite likely that it was the death of my son that was a problem. And I actually brought my wife to a therapist about 6 months before that because I felt that she probably hasn't dealt with the death of her son yet. And in good kind of mansplaining terms, and my wife was in very good shape. I think it was the second session in with the therapist where she said, look, you know, I think it would be really good, Justin, if you kept coming back. But I think Beatrice is quite okay not to be here. And I returned for a couple of sessions, and I remember the last session, it was definitely the last session we had. I recounted a nightmare or a dream, whichever one you want to classify it, of being on a plane that was crashing, and I was flying all the time. And I said to her, oh, it wasn't that bad though, because I thought as the plane's going to crash, I'll still get to meet Joshua. So if I'm dead, it's okay. I'm sorry, some of these topics can be a bit hard to hear. But she said to me, I have to stop this session immediately. I'm not equipped to deal with this. And I need to refer you to your GP. This is not an area I can continue with. Which, for the avoidance of doubt, whenever there's a thought or insight where somebody feels like there's a potential for self-harm, it's a time to open up conversation, not close it down. It's okay to allow people to speak. So I knew then that something wasn't right, but I also knew I didn't want to go to my doctor. And I think we had this conversation. I did go to my GP, and he did say it's medication. And then I found a man who still is in existence today in Ireland and keeps telling me he's retiring, called Dr. Pradeep Chadha, who happened to be on the Pat Kenny show. And I was booking myself to go to work with a therapist in New York who worked on drug-free methods. And this Indian gentleman was on the Pat Kenny show. And he was talking about the fact that you didn't need to be medicated, you didn't need to go to AA. You didn't need to do lots of different things. That trauma was felt in the body and it was healable and curable. So I got hold of him. I started to work with him. At that stage, Pradeep was working in Blanchardstown over a dodgy barber's on a side street. I was going over there in a very expensive sports car thinking, is this for real? And is this where I should be? And I was going into him telling him, man, you could create a huge business on the back of what I heard you talking about on the radio. Like, why aren't you doing this with loads of people? And he went, I'm doing it with you and you're here and here we go. And when we started therapy, he said to me, if you do everything that I ask you to do, you're going to feel a whole lot better. But I'm going to get you to turn towards all of your pain. And we're going to explore each part of it. And then you're going to feel better about it. And I said, great, let's go. And we did, and we opened up to it. And I was with Pradeep for about 6 months. But after we finished, I asked him to teach me everything that we'd been through. And I spent 2 years working with him. And he's a trained psychiatrist who gave up on it and developed methods based on Ayurvedic practices. He's a Sufi, which is an extraordinary mystical religion. And he had practices from his grandfather. But what interested me was the science that he wasn't really looking at. And I wanted to understand, how do we articulate this better? And then what can we learn from it in terms of neuroscience and psychology, and why is it happening? But the key determining factor is turning towards your pain. Because as I say to people who come and work with me now, if you come to work with me, you've been running from something for an awful long time, and you're probably tired and exhausted, like I was, and that's why I had a panic attack. So the option either is to numb it with something or to lean in. And that was the philosophy.
Mm. And, you know, this man is obviously quite non-traditional. He's not a psychiatrist. He's a different type of psychiatrist, shall we say?
He is a traditional psychiatrist who gave up on psychiatry because he just felt he wasn't having significant influence. Interestingly enough, he was a student of Dr. or Professor Ivor Brown.
Okay.
Yeah. And funnily enough, my father, when he had electric shock treatment, was under Ivor Brown. And Ivor Brown was ill, and they changed psychiatrists. And the psychiatrist who took over from Ivor Brown recommended to my mother that my father has electric shock treatment. So there was an interesting parallel, which, you know, I'm sure for many people in this room, that's not unusual. That brought me into that moment, and Pradeep could learn from Ivor Brown that the essence of the human is healing, and we can all heal, but it's hard.
Yeah, it's funny when you mention Ivor. He's a bit of a legend, you know. We showed his movie here, a different venue, but a few years ago. Yeah. Did I interview him?
Beauties.
He was there at the very end, only 10 minutes. Yeah, yeah, you're right.
Lovely man.
I had a good chat with him, actually. Yeah, I forgot about that. Thanks for reminding me, Catherine. I'm delighted to have you. Yeah, yeah. That was an amazing night, and his movie is the whole.
Yeah,
the whole
the
thing was
movie's
incredible.
fantastic.
Yeah, I think I nearly had a panic attack that night as well, because the movie wouldn't work, and the place was full, and we couldn't get the movie to work. And there was a technical guy, and he had a knife in a laptop, and I said, "Should I be worried?" And he went, "Yeah." No, it was a different guy. It wasn't Brendan, it was Tommy. So yeah, so that's why that probably overshadowed meeting Ivor, you know, because I just was so glad it actually happened, you know. But I wanted to ask you, Justin, about, so talk therapy, there is a place for it, right? Because when you go and you have a chat with someone and you say, I'm going through a tough time, you feel better, you know, you do. So where's the balance between, in your estimation now, between talk therapy and kind of working on the nervous system and facing the pain? Where do you find the balance in that?
the more I kind of looked into this, what I found interesting, and part of my master's in mindfulness-based intervention was the cognitive therapy side. And cognitive therapy or talk therapy is very helpful for situational challenges, you know, and in many ways it's a fantastic business model if you're a therapist as well, because every week or every month your client arrives in and they unpack the problems of that month, and then you help them with the next month, and then they come back, and so it goes on and on and on, forever. And I was really interested in, why not just heal the problem? Like if we're only fixing, you know, the suffering, what if we get right back to the pain and understand it? And the big difference, and especially in terms of what I learned with Pradeep, which he calls emotive brief therapy. If probably the best way to describe it is if I give you some context for Joshua. And I do quite a lot of work with first responders and service people in the US. And we get into PTSD and the impact of sounds and feelings. When I was flying a lot, and this was like 10 years ago, at takeoff and landing, they were really, really upset about headphones and phones and everything. Now it's a bit more kind of, take some of them off. But then you had to take everything off. So there was always that kind of 7 to 8 minutes where I was completely untethered. I had to sit there, and I wasn't able to hear or listen or distract myself. And I would get flashes of Joshua that would appear, and it would send shivers down my spine. It was, you know, Vietnam movie kind of flashback scenario. And I knew that that was a problem. And talking about it was not really doing anything for me, because I talked about it with the therapist and she was nearly having a panic attack. So with Pradeep's approach, the difference was, you're not going to talk about it. You're going to use meditation. You're going to consistently meditate. You're going to help calm your nervous system. And then he's going to use what he called the wiper technique. And in essence, what that is you come to the point of pain. Now, before you work on the big topics, you'd work on the smaller ones. So where talk therapy in this approach works quite well is that you do your history at the start. So you go through the tapestry of your life. Where are all the threads in the tapestry of your life that have come undone? And for me, the initial threads could be something rather innocuous, you know, a girlfriend who breaks up with you when you're 15. You still feel that. If somebody asks you a question, you remember, oh yeah, there was that when I was 15. Or, you know, those kids when I was 11 who were unpleasant to me in school, I still remember them. You know, at a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old, when you still remember these things, they are having a ripple effect on your nervous system. Don't ignore them. So we'd start on the small, innocuous things. And the wiper technique is like, here's the pain, and it's shuddering and shaking, and it's, you know, it's breaking up the force field as you get close to it. But the more you look at it, the less intense it becomes. And we didn't speak about it. The way that the approach works is that you pick a topic, and let's say it's Stephen, who bullied me when I was 11 years of age. But closing my eyes, and I would be given the opportunity to bring my mind back to the memory of Stephen when I was 11. Find my first memory of Stephen together. And then run through the chronological order of my life with Stephen from that first moment to the current moment. And do it in my own head, with my eyes closed, without saying a word. And you watch a movie of that actor and you, and it moves at extraordinary speed. And then I would say, okay, I've come to the end. And Pradeep's approach would be, okay, now go backwards, which is very difficult when you go backwards through a difficult challenge. But as you go back through it, it's like, and you watch somebody, it's a somatic exercise. So as somebody's doing this, and if you look at it in terms of PTSD especially, it's felt. But each time you move through it slowly, gently, it becomes a little bit easier in the body, a little bit easier in the body. And then after, depending on how the somatic responses are, then ask the person to still keep their eyes closed and ask them, this question is, if you were to rate your level of stress, tension, or anxiety from 0 to 10 right now, with 0 being completely calm and 10 being extremely stressed, what number would it be? And of course, that first pass, most people are 9, 10. It's horrendous. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here. Please bear in mind that this is, very much a safe environment when you're doing it. It's a contained environment. And you've worked up to a point of one of these events. But typically you start with something rather innocuous. So like that interaction with an 11-year-old, it's not innocuous. If it's remembered, the body holds the score, as I'm sure you all know. And then inviting him to explain what he notices. Oh yeah, I noticed that those kids were mean and it was really unpleasant and wasn't happy. Okay, anything else? No, that's it. And that's the only interaction. Not asking for the detail, the events, and then you go back in. You might go through this process where you ask that question 3 times and they may pass that topic 10 times or 20 times, depending on how the body's reacting. And eventually, the score is kind of 2 or 3. And what's even more extraordinary is they start to say, sorry, I got distracted. I was thinking about making dinner later on. Because we're taking it out of that traumatic brain space. It's like, I originally was trained to be a computer scientist, and I see the brain like a computer. We have this RAM drive that is there to give you insight to trauma, and it files difficult things in this space, but it's a relatively small space. And when it starts to fill up, it becomes overwhelmed, and you start going offline. So as we clean these things down, it becomes easier. And then we move on to the more difficult, more traumatic thoughts. And that's what happened with me and Joshua. And now I can talk about Joshua's last breath. I can see him dying with us together. And it doesn't hold intensity in my body. Of course, it holds emotion, but it doesn't derail me. And this is the real insight to being human. We have immense resources within us that are untapped. And if we tap them, they appear. But it's not easy. It's simple.
Mm. So going in like that and viewing it and then kind of desensitizing to it over a period of time. It sounds a little bit like some of the work Bandler did, Richard Bandler.
Yeah.
Is there correlations there?
Yeah, there is. One of the interesting things that Pradeep really worked on, and this was something that I got very interested in, is the backwards movement. So it might sound relatively benign. What's the difference between going forwards and backwards, right? But when we look at trauma and we start with that epicenter, you're like, and then you move out and it's like, okay, now I understand it now in the context of what's happening. And like the trauma that happened to you when you're 5 or 10 or 15 or 25 still plays out 5 minutes ago. So you literally will come right up to this moment. But when you go in reverse, it's a very destabilizing thing for the brain. So the brain is now having to try and really think hard and refile chronologically backwards. And it becomes much more challenging. And as you get to the end of the session, you use 3 or 4 backwards motions. But suddenly, when things align chronologically in reverse, and you start to go backwards through your trauma, the body and the mind just start to align. And they realize this isn't happening right now. So trauma has a way to work on the temporal lobe to create a time and space that's still happening. But it hasn't. It's gone. And it's only when we allow it to really see past the illusion that it's gone, it changes.
You know, it's amazing because spirituality and psychology have kind of buffered up against each other over the years, you know, because spirituality, a lot of it now is, well, a lot of it when I was listening to people like Abraham Hicks was, you know, focus on the positive, everything's terrific, get your frequency high. And there's a lot of truth in that, you know, because when you raise your frequency, the outer world does reflect, right? But then there's times where you realize that there's stuff in your body, as Gabor Mate would say, the body keeps the score. It doesn't need to be there anymore, you know? So what you did was you went in and you kind of deleted this stuff, yeah? So that you could be clearer in the world. So that's kind of the boundary where they both meet.
Not,
Is that
not
what you,
delete,
not delete, no?
find peace with.
Find peace with.
Never
Okay.
step.
Okay. Okay.
It's not going to go away.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
doesn't need to destabilize you.
Okay. So when you look at someone like Eckhart Tolle or somebody who will say all there is the present moment, just bring yourself 100% into the present moment. I suppose what I'm trying to say is you can't really get away from what's in the body. You do have to kind of make peace with it at some point.
Yeah, I mean, like we were talking about this before we came up, Paul, and one of the, on this journey, I happened to discover that the first trauma in my life was actually being operated on as a baby in 1975 without anesthesia. Because a friend of mine, Dr. Brian Penny, if anybody's ever come across Brian before, Brian and I were in UCD together a few years ago, and Brian is a PhD in neuroscience, very interesting guy who was a heroin addict, and then reformed in 2013, and written books and is astounding. Actually, he did some work with Gabor Mate recently when he was in Dublin. But Brian identified the fact that his heroin addiction came from the pain that his body endured as a baby being operated on in 1975, because he had twisted bowels and was operated on in Dublin by a surgeon. And I was operated in Dublin with the same condition at the same time, 3 weeks apart. And Brian gave a lecture in UCD about this, and I sat in and listened to it, and I thought, this is complete mumbo jumbo. Like, he's blaming heroin addiction on something that happened to him. Now, this was like 5 years into my journey. I was already trained and worked with Dr. Pradeep Chadha. I'd read The Body Keeps the Score. And it was only when I went to really consider and go deeper into the work that I realized that that was the core of my pain. And originally I thought the core of my pain was understanding the relationship with my parents, because the thing that pushes you over the edge, for me, Joshua's death and not grieving, is just the straw that breaks the camel's back. And then we delve into it and we delve into it. But in order to become present, you have to stop living in the past. And that's not an instructional activity to the body. It might be an instructional activity to the mind. But if your body is in a perpetual state of sympathetic response, if you are chronically dysregulated and in fight and flight, unless you learn to regulate your body, you can't talk it down. So you have to get back from that. I mean, there's a lot of Eckhart Tolle's work, and I'm a huge fan, and I've studied extensively in Buddhism, and I'm a massive fan of Taoism. But this is the 21st century, and we're chronically stressed predominantly by things that are even in our pockets. These teachings are not from a time that is with us now. And we have so many stresses. And as you said at the start, the world is a very challenging place right now. So in order to find the ability to be present, you have to find the ability to be with yourself. You have to find the ability to befriend your Lieutenant Dan. You have to find the ability to be in stillness. And you're only going to do that when you start exploring your pain.
And that brings us right, so as I said at the beginning, meditation was for me a way of finding peace, but there was a missing link for me, as in my body was still, kind of dealing with stuff and being stressed out, And you're running a magazine called Positive Life, and you're going around going, how am I, I can't be stressed out. But of course I can, but it's not suiting the brand, So I was like, I need to calm this down. I was running all these big events and I was going around hyperactive, And if I'm running an event and I'm stressed out, that's not a good look, So I said, okay, what can I do? And that's when I came across yoga nidra was a very big one for me. That was, I would say, life changing. That was only like 2 years ago, year and a half ago. And then I came to your work as well. So people are we have a sympathetic system and we have a parasympathetic system. Okay. And the sympathetic, obviously, we need to function in the world. It keeps us alert, keeps us active. But having worked with the vagus nerve yourself and the parasympathetic now, for how many years have you been really delving into it in your own personal experience?
9 years.
9 years, okay. I mean, it's an incredible system, the way the body works, and when you go in there and you tap into that system, is there layers and layers and layers of it? Like, are you finding you can just go deeper and deeper into this kind of sense of peace and calm through the nervous system?
Yes. I mean, look, the level of complexity in terms of the vagus nerve is quite extraordinary. I mean, one of the first books that I really found quite interesting, and I'll share the link with you. Anybody who wants to get really technical, is written by an American doctor, Dr. House, and it is, I think, in the order of about, I think it's like 500,000 words. It's an encyclopedia, and this is just on cranial nerve 10. And the vagus nerve is an interesting nerve because it's the only cranial nerve that actually leaves the brain and then moves throughout the whole of the body. And it touches all parts of the body. Some of the really interesting talks that I've given were to the MS Society and the ME societies, and you see and get to know these people who have these chronic diseases, and they have, when you talk about the vagus nerve, it resonates hugely. When you talk about Crohn's disease, IBS. So the vagus nerve is touching the bowels, the kidneys, the livers. It's in your respiratory system. It's in your heart. It's touching all parts of your body. And to go back to your point a second ago, the sympathetic system is like your temporary system. We should not be in the sympathetic state. I'm probably slightly on the edge of my sympathetic state here at the moment because you're all looking at me. But I'm predominantly in homeostasis, touching parasympathetic. And our sympathetic system is designed to make sure that we make quick decisions and survive. So if somebody comes up and they block the doorway and they're a threatening person, and I feel my safety is under question, it's really important that I don't start applying mathematics. There's a 60% gap on his left side, 40% on his right. By the time I've had the mathematical equation, he's attacked me. So the nervous system is designed to shut down the prefrontal cortex and to move you to the amygdala. So it goes into fight and flight, and I just hit him and try and get past. Now, after that happens, what should happen relatively quickly therein is something that I'm sure if I ask you all to consider back to being a kid, you remember this feeling. That times when you were nearly caught and you got away with something, you had matches or a lighter or a cigarette, you usually had all of them. And somebody was about to catch you and you hit it, and then you went, oh, jeez. That's your vagus nerve. That's moving from sympathetic to parasympathetic. But the problem today is we don't have that response available. We actually stay in sympathetic. And we stay in this kind of like low grade anxiety where it's like always on. It's like tick, 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 tick. And it only needs like somebody to beep their horn or drop a cup and you're like, boom, triggered. So we want to notice that parasympathetic and homeostasis is a place to be. And there's two huge component parts of that. One is, you know, I always give the analogy that if you're born into the world with a glass like this and it's empty, and as you move through life, the water level rises and that signifies your stress. If it gets to the top and the water level is overflowing, that's when you're out of control. You can't do the basics. If I handed you your credit card and your mobile phone bill, you'd be like, oh, I can't deal with that right now. I can't think about it. Because your sympathetic nervous system is in absolute control. And it's not allowing your prefrontal cortex, your smart brain, has been shut down. So you need to get the water level down. So why deal with your trauma? Why deal with your difficulty? Anybody who remembers their physics from secondary school will remember displacement. If I put a weighted object in water, it rises. Every difficult challenge that you face, the death of Joshua was a pretty damn big stone in there. And when I befriended his death, and actually through befriending his death and the memory of his death, I actually got past the moment of him dying and suddenly opened up my memories to the year of him living, which was pretty fantastic. We had a really nice time as a family. So you take the stone out and the water level starts to drop. So you work that in conjunction with a meditation practice, breathing exercises, some somatic exercises. Cold water is an interesting one to talk about. But you work all these in so that your water level starts to come down. And when you create space, it's Viktor Frankl, the space between the stimulation and your response to the stimulation is where you find your freedom. It's the calmness that we create within ourselves, and then we can just navigate life.
You know, calmness is the new cool, isn't it? How many people would describe themselves as reactive? Okay, nobody's admitting to only one.
Your
Okay,
meditation beforehand.
so yeah, yeah, you're all completely calm, yeah, all the time. I love it. So, Justin, we are going to go to a break soon, right? Before we go, let's bring people into a little experience, I think, with the vagus nerve now, yeah?
Mhm. Yeah.
And also, if you can talk about the importance of nasal breathing, which you'll probably do in your intro anyway, and also nitrous oxide as well, which nasal breathing generates, yeah? So we'll do a short little exercise and then we'll go for a tea break with Justin, yeah?
I'll do a little exercise. So I'll invite you to do it. Please feel free not to do it. If you are right now feeling really stressed or really tense, it works better. This exercise, and I'll share a note with you afterwards because I've actually just written about this in the last couple of days. So I'll put that around and you can have it because it's going to be in my book. So it's been right in the forefront of my mind. But this exercise is what I give to clients to use as in a case of an emergency, break glass. Okay. So this is how to quickly get your nervous system to start switching into parasympathetic. And let me try and do this while I'm actually I'll stand up because it's easier. Yeah, you might hold. Thanks. So what you're going to do is I just want everybody to put their hands into a prayer-like position, and your thumbs are just kind of resting against your breastbone. And as you're there, I just want you to connect to the breath, okay? And we'll talk about nasal breathing a bit more afterwards. But for now, just just focus on nasal breathing. So mouth closed, if you can, and if it feels okay. And just breathing in through the nose, out through the nose. And in particular, I want you to just focus on the exhale through the nose being longer than the inhale. And if I forget to tell you why we're doing this, please somebody ask me afterwards, because this is really important. So you're taking a breath in, and then you're breathing out nice and slowly. And what I want you to do is, as you're breathing now, is just to try and make your breath a little bit more supple. So imagine if there's a piece of tissue or a feather under your nose. And you're trying not to move it now. So you're taking in a small amount of air. And then on the exhale, really slow, subtle exhale. Slow, 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 subtle, subtle. Going to move now to just the somatic part of it, okay? So, again, if you can keep using your nasal breathing, this is even more impactful, okay? I'm going to demonstrate to you what to do, and then we'll do it together. So I'm going to breathe in through my nose. And I'm going to take more of a purposeful inhale. And then I'm going to breathe out through my nose. And when my lungs are empty, I'm going to hold my breath. And you're going to see me pressing my hands together. And I'm going to keep doing it until I feel the need to inhale again, like as if I'm pulling the cord on a parachute. And then I'm going to exhale, and I'm going to repeat it. I'm going to do it 3 times, but I'll do it once first, just so you can see, okay? So I'm taking an inhale. Exhale. On the exhale, I'm pushing my left hand and my right hand together like it's a wrestling match. And I'm creating a force that all the energy is going here. You keep pushing your hands together until you feel the need to suck in again, okay? The force that you apply is just enough that you will be warming up the body, okay? You're just going to feel like your body's heating up. You're going to feel a little bit shaking. You have sensitive wrists. You can go a bit softer. And then you're just going to inhale, exhale, repeat. Does that make sense? I'll guide you through it. Okay. So, hands resting in a prayer-like position. Slowing down the breath as before. And then, when you're ready, taking a more intentional breath in. And then breathing out slowly. And when all the air is out, you're going to hold your breath. Your lungs are empty. And then start pressing your hands together. Push, 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 push. It'll be a different moment for everybody when there's a need to breathe in. So don't worry about how long you do it. It's not a competition. But then you're going to breathe back in through your nose again. And you're going to repeat the exercise exactly as you just did again. So exhale and hold and press. And then do it one more time. So 3 times. You'll feel warm. You'll feel body shaking. That's okay. That's normal. And then when you've done it 3 times, just return back to the nasal breathing again. Notice the breath. 4 seconds in, there's a nice breath. 6 seconds out. Slowing down your breathing. And then just move against that subtlety of breath, just kind of soften how you're breathing now because your respiratory system is heightened. That exercise on YouTube, I think, has been watched about 1,000,000 times. And I challenge you to find a video that has less positive thoughts, especially people who have panic attacks. If you feel a panic attack coming on and you do that, just stop it. So it's kind of like cold water, which we'll talk about later. But you're actually, the hard part is you're moving into sympathetic and then you're dropping into parasympathetic. How is that? The hand pressing technique. Dr. Pradeep Chadha, not known for his great marketing skills. Still living in Blanchardstown, yeah. Still telling me he's retiring all the time.
Above a dodgy barbershop. I love that.
Yeah.
So we'll take a break, guys, for about 5 or 10 minutes. Think about some questions you might want to ask in the second half. Have a nice cup of tea, have a chat. And there's some flapjacks out there, but it's kind of like loaves and fishes. You know, there's only a few of them, so get going. See you later. Thank you. You can put it on pause. So before we go into your Q&A, I just want Justin to go over a few of the really, the best methods for activating the vagus nerve and keeping us calm. So we mentioned some like cold water, obviously the nasal breathing. But I'll let you take it away for about 5 or 10 minutes, Justin. Yeah.
You just tell me to shut up.
Yeah.
When you're
Go
ready.
first. Go first.
I think cold water is a really good place to start because it's accessible for everybody. I live in Greystones, and everybody's in the sea. And my first interaction with cold water as an approach was when I went about 7 years ago to live and train with samurai monks in the Shonan Mountains of Japan, which is the area known as the last shogun. So if anybody's ever seen that movie, the Shonan Mountains separate this part of Japan from the rest of Japan. It's a very rural farming community, and samurai tradition still exists to this day. And I went to train with them and live with them. And we used a method and a spiritual practice, which is called Shigendo, which is a kind of a meeting of minds between Shintoism, which is the typical religious experience in Japan, and Buddhism. But Shigendo is very interesting because nothing is written down. And when you go and train with the Yamabushi, you're taught many things, but most of it you can never speak about again. So it's a very mystical religion, very much similar to Sufism, which is where my other mentor, Dr. Pradeep Chadha, comes from. But we did cold water on our first day and our second day. And when I was there in training, you're not allowed to talk, you're not allowed to speak, you've got no phones, you've got no watches, you have to wear traditional clothing, you're not allowed to make eye contact, and you're not allowed to help each other. We went through some extraordinarily extreme adventures, which we could take an entire night to discuss. But the cold water, when we were allowed to speak again after, I think, the 6th day, I asked the master, why the cold water? And he said, well, it's been going forever. And he said, think about it. If you're in battle, if you have a challenge, if you have something horrible going on with your life, you go to water, you throw it on your face, you clean yourself off. He said, it's a very primal experience. And they use it to calm the nervous system and to prime themselves each day. And they've been doing that for 1,600 years. And then I, got interested in the practice, and I've been experimenting with cold water since 2016. And I still use cold showers every day. I don't tend to swim in the sea because it's just a time issue. But we never really got to fully test what was going on until the pandemic. And so many people went in to swim in cold water. How many people here have tried cold water as a therapy? Yeah. So it's, we're probably in the order of 40% of, Ireland has, maybe at least dipped once or twice. When we look at the studies, it's really compelling. One of the best studies was carried out in 2021. And we wanted to understand what is actually happening at a physiological level in terms of your nervous system and the response. Now, we know that dopamine, I'm sure most people know what dopamine is, the happy hormone. It's the thing that we all really want to have more of, but it's in scarcity. They started testing the level of dopamine that people have before they went into cold water and when they came out. And then they started monitoring how long the dopamine levels remained elevated. And for context, and I'm not remotely encouraging this at all, the best and quickest way to heighten your dopamine is to take heroin and cocaine, right? So not a good outcome. Together, it's like rocket ship territory, right? A mix. But what we see when narcotics are used at that level is you get this huge spike, and then of course you get the chronic drop. When they started to look at cold water, what we noticed in this study was the spike was as high, but the plateauing took 3.5 hours. And I always found it really interesting because when you're with sea swimmers, nobody really knows why they keep coming back. And those people who don't swim or haven't experienced it think everybody's completely off their rocker. Because it's not a felt experience in a cognitive awareness. But what it is it's an opening up of your parasympathetic system. And it's a prolonged period of time where you're resting in that homeostasis. So people leave the sea swim, they go into their day, and those challenging meetings or experiences, or kids going to school, whatever the difficulty in the morning is, it becomes easier. And the call is there intuitively to go back the next day. And up until the early 1900s, I think it was up until about 1915, we always, as they were so eloquently described back in the day in lunatic asylums, put all of the patients into cold baths at night before they went to bed. And we sprayed them with cold water. Now, it wasn't the most caring fashion, but if you want to experience cold water, and I shower in it every day, it's bloody miserable. There's not a point that I've gone into a cold shower in the morning where I'm cock-a-hoop thinking I can't wait to get in here. But what happens is you stimulate the sympathetic response. So immediately your body moves into a state of believing that it's an imminent threat of death. Okay, your nervous system is as dumb can be. You're standing in your shower, you're in your nice house, and everything's okay. But you put cold water on, it thinks you're gonna die, get out, get out, get out. And then you choose to resist the response. And you start to breathe. So importantly, slowing down your breath in the water. Okay, and I'm not an advocate for not necessary. Slow it down. Now, of course, you'd be like, slowly slow it down. Then your nervous system goes, oh, okay, we're not going to die. This is just cold water. And because you've had that spike up, and then it realizes, oh, everything is okay, we're not going to die, it moves across into parasympathetic, and it stays with you for a prolonged period of time. So you can use cold water in the shower, you can use cold water in the sea. Gradually, if you haven't exposed yourself to it before, build it up, start with 20 minutes, 20 seconds. I work up to an hour and you'll be fine.
I think we lost them then, did we?
It's not going to last 20 minutes. Start gradually and work your way up, but ideally getting to about 90 seconds. And you are literally, the vagus nerve is a switch. If you were to look at your body as an electronic system, this is just the light switch. It's parasympathetic on, sympathetic off, parasympathetic on, sympathetic off. That's all it is. You're just moving a circuit. So there's different ways to do it. Cold water is a phenomenal way to do it. The breathing, and importantly, when we were talking about breathing, and when I gave you that exercise, the hand pressing exercise, when you exhale, it's important that your exhale is longer than your inhale. Okay? That's just telling your nervous system that right now, in this moment, I'm okay. It's the complete opposite of somebody jumping up from a chair in front of me right now. When they do that, am I likely to go? Or am I likely to go? Which one? Am I going to breathe in through my mouth or my nose? But we don't, do we? We breathe. So shock is this is for speaking, eating, and when, like I have a bit of a head cold at the moment, occasionally for breathing as a fail-safe system. Your nose is your respiratory system for your inhale, your exhale. Your mouth does not clean what you breathe, and most importantly, it doesn't produce nitric oxide. So if you think about the opposite to a shock response, is calm breathing. So you can't talk to your nervous system. I'm sure many of you have tried. I did for years. It doesn't work. You can only communicate it through somatic work and through the breath. When you slow down your breath, you tell it to be calm. And the slow exhale is really important. We're not going to get into the intricacies of heart rate variability or how we measure vagal tone, but anybody who ever wears a Whoop or an Apple Watch or an Oura Ring, you can measure how responsive your nervous system is. But as you slow down the exhale, you're giving the instruction to the nervous system to be in parasympathetic, move into parasympathetic, slow down, slow down. And interestingly, to go back again 1600 years ago, when young novice samurai warriors were going into battle, one of the last things they had to do before they went to the battlefield was to kneel in front of their master, who would produce a feather and he'd place it under their nose. And they would have to be able to kneel in meditation without moving the feather in order to be allowed to go into battle. Because the samurai knew that a calm, relaxed warrior was an effective warrior. And by the way, the Navy SEALs use exactly the same process today when they drop their people into all these horrible war zones. I'm not for 1 minute encouraging war, but they teach them nasal breathing. They teach them how to access the parasympathetic system, because when you get dropped into a danger zone, you need to read maps, you need to understand geometry, you need to tap into all of your skills. So the breath is where we access it. Johnny Sexton actually spoke about this on a podcast where he's been exposed to mindfulness in the last 5 or 6 years. And the breathing that he does before he takes a kick. Because if you think about it, 1 minute, you've got somebody who wants to rip your head off. And the next minute, you need to be calculating the speed of the air, the density of the air, and how far away you are from a goal to kick something very small at great distance. So he needs to move from that fight state into his mathematical brain. So cold water and breathing, super simple ways to access it. And there's other things you can do too, like even gargling. Just gargling water activates your vagus nerve. So in the morning time, When you gargle, you stimulate the vagus nerve. There's so many different points in the body, and if you look at the chakras in the body, and you look at Kundalini yoga, you look at the Kundalini serpent, points at which the Kundalini serpent touches the body are the points at where the vagus nerve are, which is quite extraordinary because we understand the vagus nerve in the last 40 or 50 years because we have fMRI scans where we can literally dissect the entire body. But Eastern traditions have known about this for God knows how long.
Justin, it's nitric oxide. Is that,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Just why is that so important for the body?
So anybody who's on blood pressure tablets will have some concoction that will stimulate nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is what lowers our blood pressure. So it's very important for us in the context of how we feel and also how we feel in terms of being regulated. If you breathe through your mouth, which by the way, if you're chronically stressed, you will predominantly breathe in through your mouth and out through your mouth. And you probably won't notice it. So the way to do this is to ask a friend or a partner or a teenager, somebody who'll really enjoy annoying you, to point out that you keep breathing in through your mouth. When I breathe through my mouth like this, I'm taking air in that's not going to be filtered or cleaned. So that's point one. Secondly, I've got no way of testing the temperature. So believe it or not, when you breathe in through your nose, there are 1 million sensors all the way through your upper respiratory system that test the speed, so the velocity of the air as it passes through your nose, the temperature of the air as it passes through your nose. It's constantly building up pictures as to whether or not does it need to be stressful. Once it's then carried out those tests, it then splits the air and it uses the carbon dioxide in order to make nitric oxide. And there's a chamber in the upper respiratory system that's only accessible through the nose that creates nitric oxide. So it's important for all of us because it makes us feel calmer and it lowers our blood pressure. And people who are chronically stressed breathe through their mouth. People who are having panic attacks don't breathe through their nose, okay? This is the mechanics of what's going on in your body. For men, nitric oxide is super important because you will get erectile dysfunction just by breathing incorrectly. If you are a mouth breather, you have an 85% chance of having erectile dysfunction. And a lot of men are taking medication to enhance something that if they were breathing through the nose would be quite different. And I can tell you, I've experimented with this and, you know, I'll save my wife's blushes. But one of the things I did about 3 years ago was to start taping my mouth. And as a young man, I remember back in the day, you'd wake up in the morning and there would be noticeable changes in the lower parts of your body. I think Oasis wrote a song about it. What's the story, Morning Glory? While I was taping my mouth, within a couple of months, this started to come back. So the sensitivity of the penis and the blood flow is impacted by the proportionate amount of nitric oxide that we have flowing through our body. And when you take Viagra, it is just doing the job of what your nose can do. Now, there are lots of reasons why other people may have erectile dysfunction, but much of it is psychosomatic due to stress, and then as a consequence, a dysregulation in how we breathe. So it's quite a helpful little tip.
So mouth tape for all the lads on the way out. Gloria has it ready. Gloria has it ready for you. Couldn't resist that one. Couldn't resist that one. Yeah. It is great to hear, Garrick. Garrick, delighted with that, eh? All the lads are kind of going, I don't need that. I don't need any mouth tape. What are you talking about? So questions.
Zinc oxide tape and boots. It's very cheap. There's lots of very expensive mouth tapes that you can spend extortionate amounts of money on. But zinc oxide tape is about £4. And it's fantastic because it's used for wounds. So the zinc oxide makes it safe on the lips and the mouth. It comes off really easily. When you start mouth taping, it'll come off all the time for the first few days and week, but just stay with it. And then eventually you just get used to it and you don't think about it. I still tape my mouth to this day, and I predominantly do it not because of the need for more sex. I predominantly do it because I know that it calms my nervous system. So at the cornerstone of this, if you come away from this with nothing else but more nasal breathing, a little bit of cold water, and explore the idea of mouth taping. If you are chronically stressed or anxious or struggling, or you have somebody in your life who is, I'd give it a go. It's a fiver in boots. There's stuff on my YouTube channel. If you type in Justin Caffrey mouth taping, there's a longer explanation of it all.
Yeah, don't do the mouth taping on a first date or a one night stand.
No.
Might kind of throw her off, you know. But you sleep way deeper as well. You get much better sleep.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.